Welcome to Exploring Hidden Stories in the World of XCOM 2. GDC's almost done, guys, so this should be good. Just a couple more talks. My name is Justin Rodriguez. I'm a senior environment artist at Firaxis Games. I've been at Firaxis for 9 years, and throughout that time, I've worked on all the XCOM titles that Firaxis has shipped, from XCOM Enemy Unknown, which you'll hear me today talking about as XCOM EU, all the way till XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. Before we get started, how many of you have played XCOM? Very cool. How about War of the Chosen? Awesome. Before we get started, I'm going to show a video so we can get into the mood of XCOM. So XCOM 2 is a tactical, turn-based, cover-based strategy game. It's safe to say that working on environments for this game is complex. What you're seeing right now is basically just our pathing visualization, and that's just not everything that we can look at. It could be even more complex looking if we start adding collision to this. And not only was the game complex just from a markup side, but it also had multiple camera angles. What you see right now is the default camera angle and the glam cam shot when you're picking your shot and shooting at the aliens. And most of our buildings and environments were destructible. And all the levels were procedural. This is one of the small town levels that you guys might have seen in the game. And this is the exact same level with a supermarket. And this snowy church level with the playground to the left is also the same level. All of these factors led to extensive markup in all the levels for both environment artists and the level designers. So how do you weave narrative storytelling into a procedural environment? During XCOM 2 production, I was responsible for creating props, textures, and world building, and decorating roughly 76 out of the 174 core levels. If we were to count all the smaller levels in the game, there was 508 level components in XCOM 2. I had the help of of 2 junior artists, interns, and 1 lighting artist. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to do a quick explanation of just how these levels worked. So what you see here is the same small town level, and this is how the levels were actually put together. The whole entire level was called a plot, and we had holes so the actual levels could socket into this, and those we called parcels. Most of these levels could also be rotated 360 degrees. And many of the levels had to work in different biomes and weather conditions, like we saw before. A lot of time was spent marking up textures and adding weather assets for biome swapping. What you see right here is one of the 2 small town homes, and there's icicles in the snow version of this level. All of those were hand-placed and hand-filtered in different layers in-game. With doing all this, we knew that larger narrative elements would not work in procedural environments, at least for ours. We could limit the map rotation and limit the randomness of levels, but it made the maps feel, look, and play too similar. Uncertain how we would solve this issue, we began art passes and world building on the levels. During this time, we made an effort to update levels with level design. What you see here is actually a couple tests to see how we could add a pop of color within the interior spaces, because at the time, we didn't know whether or not we wanted really colorful exteriors of the buildings, because what if a very red building came in and procedurally plopped right next to a very blue building? It would start to look rainbowy, and we didn't want that. So working on each one of these levels, we wanted to make sure that they still felt distinct, but worked in any random combination. After a few levels, we became confident we could make the procedural levels work and look good. But we thought we could do more than just a quick set dressing pass. We wanted every level in XCOM to feel fun and interesting, like the first game we shipped, XCOM EU. Also, it's a tactical turn-based strategy game. So that means that in between turns, we know that the players are going to be looking at the environments. So with limited concept support and hundreds of levels to work on, a few of us were constantly brainstorming to find an identity for each level. It was at this point that someone had proposed that we looked at old XCOM EU maps for inspiration. We created new brands for stores and restaurants in the game for XCOM 2, but we thought it would be cool to give an old nod to the XCOM EU businesses. This is when I loaded up one of my favorite levels from the old game, Office Paper. The Shop Paper Company was a funny detail that came from in the path of XCOM 2's microstories. Jeremy was the lead graphics programmer on the project for XCOM EU, and we thought it would be cool to putting his name in the game with a couple of ours. So when I saw this, I was inspired enough to follow this story of the Shop Paper Company into XCOM 2. I wanted to explore what happened to it in the world of alien occupation. I figured Shop, the company CEO, with his quick initiative, would have diversified his company knowing that alien occupation would have brought a swift end to the paper industry on Earth. So Shop Paper Company became Shop Material Industries in XCOM 2. After doing this, finishing levels became easier and had better results when embracing the impression of smaller details. The team loved seeing stories created from the inclusion of 1 or 2 extra story props in a level. As you can see here, this is one of our small town levels. We made it to make sure it fit into our feel of the small town, kind of run down. But at one point, when working with one of the other artists, he said, "You know what would just really make this?" I said, "What?" He said, "Just a little detail." So I found a Frisbee and just put it on the roof. He said, "This is great." So I was now thinking up stories first, too, before decorating. And this was a great way to stay actively engaged in world building for almost 80 levels. It helped do away with generic deco passes. The narrative details are small and delicately placed around each level. And all of these details are small enough to work in any level layout or rotation. I also began to add various ranges of micro-stories to the levels. What you see here on the screen, there's a blanket and a pillow on the ground. I used to call those the sleepers when we were working on those. And basically, I had this idea that within the alien-occupied Earth of XCOM 2, people were kind of misplaced. They didn't have homes. So you would just see somewhere where they shacked up for the night or basically try to sleep somewhere and they would leave the next day, or maybe that was the last place that they spent. Now, also with that, that's a detail that I put all over the place. I also had specific ones that were just in one level, like the pizza party. Cowabunga. So throughout production of XCOM 2 and expansion of War of the Chosen, I actively worked to refine my process and establish a few techniques that became helpful in creating the small town narratives decorated throughout the game. I'd like to share some of these with you right now. So first, be resourceful. Not much time to create. You don't have much time to create stories with unique assets, especially in XCOM. Getting in the mindset of creating unique from generic is something really good that you can kind of adhere to. And create characters and follow them. I created anonymous characters for all the props that I used to decorate within XCOM 2, and you'll see that in a few minutes here. And gather small deco to make landmarks. There's no need for giant statues and set pieces. Unique props take time, and you don't have much reuse. So try to make a story, or try to with just a few small assets. Establish breadcrumbs and motifs. Basically, whenever you use something as small as a flower pot, and you know if you're going to use it somewhere else, make sure that you think about why these assets are being placed in multiple locations or multiple levels. And flow with level design. When you do deco your maps and your levels, make sure that the player will see them, or they enhance the story or enhance the player's exploration. I worked very hard with the level designers to make sure everything that I did place in the game was near cover points or specific locations that we knew that the player would travel. I knew I didn't have much time or space for large narrative set pieces, so small assets became my go-to props in creating stories and leaving narrative hints. These are just some of my favorite props to use, and if you played XCOM 2, you'll see them in a lot of places. So, Now, I'm going to take you through a few examples of my micro stories. Flower Pot Man. Slums levels and buildings were some of the last levels to be designed by Level Design. They were two-story buildings that had business on the bottom and an apartment up top. So before I started decorating in the levels, I went through each level and assigned a business to the first floor and a character who lived above. This apartment belongs to the Flower Pot Man. Flower Pot Man is a single male, and he's extremely passionate about growing plants and living in a better environment. You can basically see here that on the rooftop, I reused some of the small town assets and had a little water collection for him and just flower pots. This guy was just growing as much plants as he possibly could, hopefully to bring back the ozone of this alien-occupied Earth. So whenever I placed the flower pots in slums, I always thought about Flower Pot Man and how they got there. My hope was to use these flower pots all over this house to landmark the level for the player. This asset was made and primarily used in small town, like I said, and I hoped the cross-pollination would help seat slums in the same world or universe of XCOM 2. Also, since these flower pots were so small, it also helped me keep these slums levels feeling utilitarian. The decision to follow Flower Pot Man also helped me make the rooftops of slums feel unique as well. So when you're on top, as you know, if you played XCOM, you do get bonuses for shooting on rooftops. So I thought that would be kind of a cool place to put most of my deco. So here's another story that I worked on. It's called The Family in the Shrine. When some of the concept paintings started being finished for the paintings that you find in the game, there was one that one of our concept artists, Min, made that was of a family. And I almost went back to the concept artist and said, listen, this is too unique. I want to have something that's generic enough that I can place in a lot of levels. And before I went over, I said, you know what, I'm going to try to make a story out of this, and I'm going to make sure that I'm only going to put it in one or two levels in the game. So I decided to leverage this unique painting to make a story. So as you can see, it's a family of three. My whole idea was that the father and mother split because of the alien invasion. And I left breadcrumbs trying to show that the aliens were attempting to kind of coerce the humans to move to the alien-made city centers, or our futuristic cities in XCOM 2. As you can see here, this is kind of a culmination of not only the painting and slums that you would see in the small town building, or the house, but there's also just other little details here. So I figured that the mother would live in this slums apartment, and there's a little, pillow and a blanket here where she would basically think about her family, or while looking at this kind of shrine that she made. And you can also see that, it was hard to see, but I actually have an XCOM symbol over the father's head. So she must have been coerced by the aliens, but the father actually was trying to support XCOM. Actually, let me just go back here. You can also see right to the right, there's a propaganda center cross. That was one of the, that was one of the alien symbols that the Advent had in their propaganda centers. I had it here kind of trying to create a breadcrumb to this small town level where we had a church, and the propaganda symbol is also on the back of the church wall. So here's one of my last stories I'll share with you guys. The Eye Doctor. Really quick, we'll get through this one. We only had so many futuristic assets for slums. And there was one asset that wasn't being used, just a set of 3D printers that we used for cover. And I decided to kind of place these in the bottom of the business. Now, like I said, there was the second story was always the apartment. The first story was a restaurant or some sort of business. But we didn't have any doctors or doctor's offices or anything, so I decided to make an optometrist. So I thought it would be cool that you would walk into this optometrist, this futuristic one, and immediately get your eyes scanned, and they would 3D print your glasses right there. And when I was trying to figure out who would live above, I thought that it would be really cool that the doctor that worked there was actually living in the apartment above. Around the same time, I got a set of children's toys to help deco the levels. I thought it would be cool that the doctor would, after a work day, would use the 3D printers to print out toy cars for the children in the slums neighborhood. So you can see here, there's actually a little toy car there. And in his apartment on the deck, he's priming some of these toy cars or painting them. And then I would start to try to decorate any other house that I knew that I had children living in the apartment with some of these toy cars. So you can't see them here, but if you look in the satellite dish, they were actually kind of pushing them around and racing them around there. So real quick, let's just summarize the techniques and tips that I used. Try your best with props you have available to you. You know, you won't always have this ability to have unique assets, but you know, you can make something out of nothing. Assign characters and assign characters to specific props you use to decorate. And don't rely on large set pieces and unique assets to create landmarks for the player. As you can see here, I just had a couple folding chairs. This is in our sewers level in XCOM War of the Chosen. And I just kind of used these right next to the wall, and I propagated some of them near cover pieces where the soldiers can take cover. And my whole idea with this is that maybe there's a couple old men from New York City that were still trying to play chess even though they had to live in the sewers. And establish breadcrumbs and motifs. Like I said, if I used the chess set, I have used a chess set in the sewers, I would always think it was kind of the same guys that were finding these chess sets and playing chess before the Advent came in and broke it up. One other tip for you guys, keep your deco characters anonymous. It just makes it easier to kind of move through these levels faster, and you don't have to worry about doing a little too much with these stories if you don't have time. The deco characters in the space don't need to be identified to be effective. However, if one of your characters is received well by the team or fans, maybe they can be identified. This is I don't know if you can see it, but this is the last resting place of our poor graphics programmer, Jeremy Shop. It says on the wall, "I was the paper king." So he definitely regrets moving to Material Industries. And trust yourself for inspiration. Flower Pot Man's silly, I know, but having these characters and stories helped me deco all these levels and give them the bespoke details they deserved. Small details and little stories you create will be enough to fill these spaces. And it's okay to be weird. In fact, try to be. We only used mannequins in one of the abandoned city levels in War of the Chosen. I thought it was a missed opportunity, and I wanted to use more of them, but I was working on the sewers. So I decided to make a sewer fashion show. And try to up the ante. You know, when I did this and it received, you know, some interest from some of the other artists, I was like, what am I going to do next, you know, without making it too unique? Now, all these stories and details are helpful because it reinforces emergent gameplay. And XCOM thrives off that. You know, from playing XCOM, you really start to have a connection with your soldiers, especially if they're still living. And it adds depth to player experience. It helps fill in and reinforce XCOM 2's main story. All of these stories that I was working on, I always considered the fact of alien occupation and that all these people were either coerced to move into the futuristic alien cities or trying to make their way into smaller towns. And most importantly, inspires a player to make their own. And seeing these player stories, I can be inspired to create new stories. This process has been rewarding during development of XCOM 2 and War of the Chosen, and I hope to refine it in future products. I hope to refine my cooperation with the level design team. I hope earlier on in our next projects, we can work on the mood and pacing of levels with some of these deco pieces. And it'll make it easier for me to hide these stories or put these stories in the levels. And the deco assets, I hope that we can work to get the scale and color complement the gameplay interactables, like the cover assets. And I would love to have heat maps in our future games. I could decorate these levels using these heat paths and inversely use them to hide cool details and promote exploration somewhere the player wouldn't go. I think it's important to note as well, not every player will find or appreciate this work, but the ones that do will enjoy more depth of the game that they love. And it isn't wasted work. It allows you to have a direction when decorating the space and will make sure that the levels you create are full of life. In fact, at the end of our Slums production, we had a little bit of extra time, and they said, "Is there any other assets that we can make for you, Justin?" And I said, "You know, it'd be really cool if we get some cool graffiti set pieces that kind of reference what's happening in the story." So one of our artists, Andrew, made these awesome graffiti pieces, and I hid them in the kind of the alleyways of the slums, and it really helped kind of landmark some of these other levels. And don't be afraid to get time or try to make time to do this. Having rough estimates of how long this deco pass takes allows you to plan for it accurately with production. Balancing cost and time to decorate can be explored even by blocking out your deco assets in a proxy gray box phase. This also helps you establish a sense of scale in your level. As you can see here, I'm actually walking you through the process of making the sewers. So what you're seeing is gray box. But even earlier on, when I got some base textures in here, you can see that I'm already placing small deco down in the level. I wanted to make sure that everything that I wanted to outline in this level was there so we could plan for it accordingly. You can even see gray box pictures on the walls, so I knew that I had time to make these assets, and I knew how they would fit into the space. And let your sense of wonder drive you when you decorate these environments in the game. It makes the task more rewarding and inspiring to those around you. Oh, let's go. Okay. So guys, thank you so much for coming to the talk. I'm always excited to talk about environment art and environmental storytelling. And feel free to contact me by email or Twitter. I also started the Environment Art podcast with the talented Ryan Benno from Somniac. And let me know what you think. We just shipped episode 2 of the podcast earlier this week. And if you haven't played XCOM, which most of you have, or War of the Chosen, pick it up. It's a blast. Thank you, guys.